I've been teaching the LSAT for almost 20 years now, and this past year, 2024, marked the most significant changes to the LSAT that I've seen in my career. LSAC, the Law School Admission Council, removed the logic game section and replaced it with a second scored logical reasoning section, which was the biggest change to the LSAT since the implementation of the current format in 1991. However, there have also been some unexpected, unannounced, more subtle changes to the logical reasoning section that are just as important for you to be aware of if you're taking the LSAT in 2025. And I'll walk you through those changes in just a moment. Before I do, for those who don't know me, my name is Steve Schwartz. I've been teaching the LSAT since 2005, and I personally increased my own LSAT score from a 152 to a 175. Now, these more subtle, unannounced changes to logical reasoning actually accompany the formal change to the LSAT with the removal of the logic game section. Now, a couple of years ago, LSAC agreed to remove the logic game section as the result of a lawsuit brought by blind test takers who argued they were at an unfair disadvantage on the LSAT because they couldn't benefit from diagramming logic games the way other test takers could. LSAC ultimately settled the lawsuit and committed to developing a new version of the test without the logic game section, and they ultimately just decided to replace logic games entirely with a second scored logical reasoning section, which is great news for test takers going forward because you don't have to learn some totally new type of question. Instead, you just study logical reasoning a bit more than you otherwise would have. Now, since this change, since the removal of the logic game section after the June LSAT, we've received reports from students who took the August LSAT, September, October, and November who have indicated that LSAC is testing more logical reasoning questions involving formal logic, more questions on conditional reasoning, where diagramming would likely be helpful. So it appears that LSAC is exploiting a loophole in their joint settlement agreement with the plaintiffs. LSAC did commit to researching and developing a new version of the test over a 4-year period from fall 2019 to fall 2023. And although LSAC did make changes to the LSAT as they indicated they might, we are now seeing more formal logic questions, more conditional reasoning questions on the scored portions of the LSAT, as well as many more of these questions in the unscored extra experimental section. So this indicates that LSAC is planning to test these questions more frequently in scored sections moving forward. Now, you might be wondering, when I refer to formal logic, when I refer to conditional reasoning, what do I mean? What can you expect on the LSAT in 2025 as a result of LSAC's loophole that they are exploiting? I mean here logical reasoning stimuli, which are short paragraphs, but these contain logic games-like statements where diagramming would be useful. So questions might involve conditional statements like if X then Y, which would suggest you might want to work with a contrapositive, link conditional statements together, and make inferences. Now, for some examples of what I'm describing, let me share a few from past exams. For example, in Prep Test 111, there's a question about inspired musical performances where diagramming conditional statements would likely be helpful. In Prep Test 117, there's a flaw question testing your understanding of numbers versus percentages. This question involves Clara Schumann, who plays the piano. In Prep Test 124, there's a parallel reasoning question about April rainfall, where diagramming would likely be useful. And in Prep Test 130, there's a sufficient assumption question involving handmade wigs, where creating a diagram would likely help as well. And so you can see here, these questions are from a wide variety of prep tests, indicating they have always appeared on the LSAT throughout LSAT history. This is nothing radically new. This is just an increased prevalence of these types of questions, meaning they're showing up more often than they have in the past. And although diagramming isn't strictly necessary for these questions, it can still definitely help. Back when logic games were on the test, LSAC used to say, oh, diagramming isn't required, although it may be helpful. But the thing is, for the vast majority of test takers, diagramming was truly essential for managing all the different moving pieces because these questions test the limits. They go beyond the limits of your short-term working memory. And so to avoid cognitive overload, diagramming is virtually necessary. And so this is why I argue here that LSAC is exploiting a loophole by testing these logic games type concepts in the logical reasoning section. So could this lead to another lawsuit? It's still too early to tell. But if you're taking the LSAT in 2025 or beyond, I recommend spending a bit more time on these concepts if you would have otherwise. And if you'd like my help, of course, there are a wide variety of ways that I could support you at LSAT Unplugged. We offer live online classes via Zoom, on-demand video courses, small group coaching, and one-on-one coaching. You can check out the links below to find out more and to book a call with me and my team. And one last clarification here before I sign off. These types of questions, like the examples I cited before, inference, flaw, parallel, sufficient assumption, these have always been part of the LSAT. Some of the questions I referenced here date back 25 years. So LSAC here is not introducing some radical, bizarre, new type of question, but we are likely to see more of these questions involving formal logic, numbers and percentages in increased frequency going forward. And the most common types of questions will remain inference, flaw, and necessary assumption. So make sure you master these before spending too much time on the less common types like sufficient assumption. Anyway, folks, that's all for now. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.